Ashley stood in the workshop, her fingers tapping rhythmically against her leg as she stared at her phone, waiting for confirmation. After making the call to Darren, she knew she needed Desera's approval before deploying the jet. Desera, the tactical leader of their pack, was the one who oversaw the jet's use, and nothing happened without her say-so. The phone buzzed in her hand, Desera's voice coming through the moment she answered. "You want to send the jet for Gunner's army, buddy?" Desera asked, her voice low and serious. Ashley nodded, even though Desera couldn't see her. "Yeah, Gunner's in a bad way, Des. If anyone can reach him, it's Darren. I think this could be the key to helping him snap out of it." Desera was silent for a moment before she let out a breath. "Fine. Send the jet. But keep me updated every step of the way. I want to know when you've got Darren on the ground." "Thanks, Desera," Ashley said, relief washing over her. "I'll let you know as soon as we're back." Moments later, the jet hummed to life, its powerful engines roaring as it lifted off vertically, the sleek form gliding into the sky with effortless grace. It would only be a few hours before it reached Darren's location. Darren Smith stood at the edge of the landing zone, his arms crossed over his chest as the sound of the jet approaching filled the air. The ground vibrated beneath his feet as the futuristic aircraft descended with the precision of a well-tuned machine. He had seen his share of high-tech military equipment during his time in the army. But this was something else, entirely. The jet hovered for a moment before touching down with a soft thud, its engines quieting as the rear ramp lowered to the ground. The interior was sleek and clean, filled with state-of-the-art equipment that Darren could only begin to guess the purpose of. He slung his bag over his shoulder and stepped inside, his boots echoing on the polished floor. The moment he was inside, the ramp lifted, and the jet rose into the sky once more, soaring effortlessly back toward its destination. When the jet finally touched down at the workshop, Darren stepped off, his eyes scanning the area. It wasn't what he had expected. Not even close. The workshop was surrounded by dense woods, with a strange, almost ethereal quality to the air. He had the feeling that whatever was going on here was far beyond any mission he had ever been on. Waiting for him at the edge of the landing pad was Ashley, her expression a mix of relief and concern. She quickly approached him, offering a hand. "Darren, thanks for coming so quickly." Darren took her hand, shaking it firmly. "Ashley, right? Where's Gunner?" Ashley nodded, a slight smile on her face. "Yeah, that's me. Gunner's inside. He's not in a good place, but I think seeing you might help. Follow me." Darren adjusted his bag on his shoulder and followed her toward the workshop, his eyes taking in the strange equipment and vehicles scattered around the area. The more he saw, the more curious he became about the world Gunner had found himself in. As they approached the main building, Darren's jaw clenched. He was prepared for what Ashley had told him, the loss of Gunner's arm and eye, the physical wounds that came with battle. But nothing could prepare him for the sight of his old friend, the man he had fought alongside through hell and back, looking so broken. They stepped inside the workshop, the air thick with tension, and Darren's heart raced as he prepared to see the man who had once been invincible in his eyes. The doors to the workshop opened, and Gunner looked up from where he sat, his body still stiff and aching from the recent battle. He wasn't expecting much, but when his one good eye landed on the man standing in the doorway, his breath caught for a moment. "Darren." Without thinking, Gunner rose to his feet, pushing through the pain, and walked straight over to the man who had been his brother in arms for so long. Darren raised an eyebrow, his trademark smirk tugging at the corner of his lips as Gunner pulled him into a rough, tight embrace. "Brother," Gunner rasped, his voice gruff with emotion. "Still a giant pain in the arse, I see," Darren replied, clapping Gunner on the back before pulling away, eyeing the bandaged stump where Gunner's arm used to be. Gunner gave him a grim smile before sinking back into the chair. exhausted but comforted by the familiar presence. Darren's eyes flicked over him, taking in the patch over his eye, the haunted look in his brother's face, and the eerie quiet in the room. Ashley hovered nearby, watching the exchange, but Darren waved her off. "Mind giving us the room for a minute?" Without a word, Ashley nodded and left the room. Darren shut the door behind her, locking it with a soft click before turning back to Gunnar. His tone shifted, a mix of concern and that dry sarcasm Gunnar had come to expect from him. "All right, spill it. What the hell happened to you? Ashley said you got into it with some hostile entity. You lose a fight with a lawnmower or what?" Gunnar huffed a laugh, but it was hollow. He could barely bring himself to explain it, his hand flexed over the missing limb as if phantom pain was still there. He stared at the ground, trying to find the words, but Darren wasn't the kind to wait. "You look like hell, brother," Darren said, pacing the room with frustration building. "What kind of classified mission ends with you like this?" Gunnar leaned back, closing his eye for a second. "It's a lot, Darren. More than I can explain right now. It's not what you're thinking." Darren snorted. "Yeah, well, you got blown to pieces and dragged back here, so it better be a damn good story. Because from where I'm sitting, you sound like you've gone mental. You're going to tell me this wasn't the result of you biting off more than you can chew?" Gunnar opened his mouth to reply, but before he could get a word out, a low, rumbling growl caught Darren's attention. He spun toward the window, where Alpha, the massive dire wolf, stood just outside. Darren's jaw slackened, his eyes going wide at the sight of the beast. "What the—" Darren started, taking a step back. "Gunnar, what the hell is that? Is that a freaking wolf?" Gunnar sighed. "Yeah, that's Alpha." Darren blinked, running a hand through his hair. "You named a goddamn dire wolf Alpha? Jesus, man, what kind of crack are you smoking? Wolves that size don't exist, not in this world." Gunnar stayed silent, letting Darren's disbelief hang in the air. He didn't have the energy to argue, and part of him wondered if he was still sane himself. Before Darren could continue his tirade, the door creaked open again, and Eli stepped inside. She moved toward Gunnar with a soft, gentle touch, her fingers brushing against his forehead as she checked on him. "You're healing well," she said softly, her voice calm and soothing. Darren's eyes narrowed as he noticed something off about her, those pointed ears peeking through her hair. He froze, staring at her in confusion. "Wait, what are you?" Eli looked at Darren with a soft, understanding smile, though her pointed ears betrayed her nature. "I'm an elf," she said simply, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Darren stood there, slack-jawed, staring at her as though he'd just been slapped. "An elf? Like Lord of the Rings kind of elf?" Eli raised an eyebrow, glancing at Gunnar as if silently asking whether this man could handle the truth. Gunnar chuckled weakly at Darren's stunned expression. "Welcome to my world, brother," Gunnar said, his voice hoarse. "It's a lot crazier than what we dealt with in Iraq, that's for sure." Darren's hand dropped to his side as he tried to process it all. He turned back to Gunnar, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You've been fighting wolves, elves, and God knows what else." Gunnar nodded, feeling the weight of it all in his bones. "Yeah, and that's not even the half of it." Darren stepped back, shaking his head, still not fully believing what he was seeing. "You expect me to just accept all this? Just like that? You know how insane this sounds, right?" Gunnar leaned forward, locking eyes with Darren. "I get it. It's a lot to take in. But I'm telling you the truth. You can ask anyone here. The world's a lot bigger and darker than what we thought. And I need your help, man." Darren stared at him for a long moment before rubbing the back of his neck. All right. I'm here. But you're going to have to explain all this to me later. And no more surprises. I don't need another freaking dire wolf outside the window." Gunnar smirked, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "No promises. Darren stood there staring at the wolves outside the window, his mind still reeling from the whirlwind of revelations. Elves, dire wolves, and whatever else lurked in Gunner's world, it was too much to process. But something in Gunner's face pulled Darren out of his shock. Gunner wasn't smirking anymore. His one good eye was fixed on the ground, his body slumped in the chair, looking more worn than Darren had ever seen him. There was no sarcasm, no forced bravado, just exhaustion, raw and deep. Without warning, Gunner broke the silence, his voice low and rough. "Why do we do it, Darren? Why do we keep pushing forward? For what? Why do we stand in the dark?" Darren's brow furrowed. Gunner wasn't asking for idle conversation. This was different. Gunner was broken, not just physically, but something deeper. Darren had seen men like this in war, the ones who had seen too much and weren't sure if they had anything left to give. Darren took a deep breath and crossed the room, leaning against the table across from Gunner, his arms crossed. His voice was steady, calm, the way it always was when they were in the thick of battle. "We stand in the dark so the innocent, our friends and our families can live in the light. It's what we do. It's who we are." Gunner raised his head slightly, his gaze meeting Darren's. "But when does it end? When is our turn in the light, Darren?" Darren let out a small chuckle, though it was tinged with a grim understanding. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully for a moment before answering. "When we're dead, brother. That's when it ends. I'm sure the Lord's got a place for us in heaven. A quiet spot in the back somewhere with a sleeping bag. After all, that's all we need, right?" A humorless smile tugged at the corner of Gunner's lips, though his eye still held that distant, haunted look. "A sleeping bag in heaven. That's our reward, huh?" Darren nodded. "That's it. But it's enough, isn't it? Because, Gunner, we don't do this for medals or recognition. We do it because someone has to. We fight so the people who matter to us, the ones who have no idea what we've seen, never have to stand in the dark like we do." Gunner exhaled slowly, his shoulders slumping further. Darren's words hit him, but they didn't take away the weight that still pressed on his soul. The room felt suffocating, the silence between them heavy. Darren watched his brother closely, knowing this wasn't something that could be fixed with a few well-placed words. After a long pause, Gunner finally spoke again, his voice hoarse. "I've lost a lot, Darren. I've seen things, done things that I don't think I'll ever come back from." Darren uncrossed his arms and pushed himself off the table, walking over to stand beside Gunner. He rested a hand on his brother's shoulder, his grip firm. "You're not supposed to come back from it alone. That's why you've got me. And them." He gestured toward the door where the pack waited. "You're not doing this alone, Gunner. You never were." Gunner's eye flickered with something. Maybe a spark of recognition, maybe just the beginning of something more. He didn't respond, but Darren knew that wasn't the point. Sometimes words weren't enough, but presence, brotherhood, that was. Darren squeezed Gunner's shoulder again. "Now, get your head straight, because I'm not about to let you sit here and wallow. We've still got a lot of fight left in us, and there's a lot of people counting on you, not just here. Back home too." Gunner didn't answer, but the silence between them felt different now. Less oppressive, less crushing. Darren straightened and took a few steps toward the door, glancing back at Gunner over his shoulder. "We stand in the dark so others can live in the light," Darren repeated, his voice softer this time. "It's who we are. Don't forget that." Gunner sat there, his gaze fixed on the floor, but Darren could see the gears turning in his mind. He wasn't expecting miracles, but maybe, just maybe, this was the first step toward bringing his brother back. As Darren opened the door and stepped out, he glanced back one last time. "You've still got a lot of work to do, brother. Get your ass in gear." Gunner let out a soft breath, the closest thing to a laugh Darren had heard from him in days. And that was enough for now. Darren reached for the door, but just as he was about to step through, a mischievous grin crept across his face. He paused and turned back toward Gunner, winking before calling out, "Hey, Kiba!" His eyes locked onto Eli, who had just entered the room to check on Gunnar. Eli arched an eyebrow at Darren, her pointed ears twitching slightly in response to his teasing. "Kiba," she repeated, her tones somewhere between amusement and confusion. Darren gave her a lopsided grin and gestured around the workshop. "Yeah, like the elves in those cookies. How about a tour of this place?" Gunnar, despite his exhaustion, let out a low groan. "Darren? Seriously?" Eli smirked, folding her arms across her chest. "You must be Darren. Gunnar didn't mention you were such a comedian." "I'm full of surprises," Darren quipped, leaning against the doorframe. "So, what do you say, Kiba? Show me around your magical wonderland? Maybe you've got a tree full of cookies somewhere." Eli rolled her eyes, but there was a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. She glanced at Gunnar, who shook his head in exasperation, though there was a faint glimmer of amusement in his tired eye. "All right, soldier," Eli replied. "I'll give you a tour, but let's get one thing straight. You're in my world now, and I don't bake cookies." Darren's grin widened. "I'll take my chances." Eli motioned for Darren to follow her, and they headed out of the room. As they disappeared down the hallway, Darren's voice echoed back. "Seriously, though? Pointy ears, magic potions, and no cookies? You elves are missing out." Gunnar leaned back in his chair, shaking his head but feeling a small, fleeting sense of normalcy return. Something he hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. He listened as Darren's voice faded into the distance, and for the first time in a long time, a faint, genuine smile crossed his lips.